Hear me? And this session is being recorded, okay. So hello all COVID-19 prisoners, I hope you are doing well. My presentation is going to follow a good professor advice who advised us, Cynthia Enlow, her name. Whenever you're doing something, find the women. Ask the question, where are the women? So I'm gonna, this is a map of the present day Sudan. Since 2011, we cut off the southern Sudan, it became South Sudan. These are the states in, it is supposed to be a federal state, but there is no semblance of federalism there. The black areas are contested areas, so we are contesting. Oh, you're not seeing the slides? Well, actually, I thought they came up.
I can see the slides. Other people say they can see them. So, okay. Jean, you might want to try, it might be on your end. You might want to try check your connection.
I'll do that. Sorry about that.
That's
okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the Sudan, surrounded by 7 countries: Ethiopia, Eritrea, or Eritrea, as we say it. This is the Red Sea, Egypt, Libya, Chad, Central African Republic, and then South Sudan. I also would like you to see faces of Sudanese women. Okay, so all these shades, different brown and black colors exist in the Sudan. Someone might say this woman is Egyptian, but she is not, she is Sudanese. And I would like to point out, as I always do, that this woman here who looks completely non-Sudanese is actually from Darfur. Because the best kept secret in the Sudan is that the Arabs who moved actually from the peninsula resided in northern Darfur and northern Kordofan, which both states are in the west. So you see all these colors and shades. These are university students. Here are women from the latest uprising in the Sudan. This is an activist. And here is a woman from Kordofan, from northern Sudan. You see all these different colors and shapes in the Sudan. So I would like to go very quickly over the historical eras, because I think the roots of the oppression of women existed from a long time ago. The first thing I will start with, because this is like the first thing in history that we're looking at, are the Nubian kingdoms in the Sudan. The Nubian kingdoms in Sudan, the first one was Kush, and of course they went in and out of Egypt, and the Egyptian conquered them. They conquered the Egyptians. However, there were things that continued in this kingdom, Nubian kingdom, whether it is Kush or when it became Marawi, when it moved down south from Egypt. It is a matriarchal society and matrilineal. Matrilineal meaning that the people inherit through their mothers. And this still exists in parts of Africa, such as in the Akan of Ghana. They still inherit from the mother side. And matriarchal because women became queens in their own right. So the kings sometimes are just the people who are in the royal family. Many of these have been recorded, and all the archaeological work that is going on in the Sudan have found out. And after these two kingdoms of course, they wore themselves out with war and with other conditions that came into the place. In came the religions. So there were Christian kingdoms, and those Christian kingdoms also kept some of the matriarchal and especially the matrilineal part was followed during the Christian kingdoms. They replaced these ancient Nubian kingdoms. And then, of course, in came Islam with it, the Arab culture. With the Arabs not being able to conquer the Nubians, they just went into a pact with them. And the pact allowed trade and allowed people to come out, in and out. And this is how the mixture of the Nubian Arab thing happened in the Sudan. However, we would like to look at part of the recent history. Part of the recent history, for example, Darfur was a sultanate, separate one. And women have a very high position in that. They were not able to be sultans, but then they have still a matrilineal part, and also were able to rule through either their husbands, fathers, or brothers. But the Ottoman Empire came in. The Ottoman Empire did not take over Darfur, but took over the rest of the Sudan all the way to the south. In that, women were brought back to what is called women's place, which is the home. And there is a dress code, and the dress code became a matter of class. So upper class women covered their faces to differentiate themselves from slave women. And I always remember that I have never been told to cover my head because I will rot in hellfire. I was told to cover my head so as not to look like a slave woman, because a slave woman was supposed to uncover their head also to differentiate themselves from the free women. And then came in an Islamic era called the Mahdiya, because the Mahdi, and this is very important, that brought in entrenched part of the oppression that continues now. The Mahdiya is an Islamic entity. I don't want to go into its history, but they fought against the biggest Islamic entity in the world at that time, which was the Ottoman Empire. They considered the Turks, and they called them the Turk, to be infidels, and no one should follow them. And the Mahdiya is going to straighten out Islam in the Sudan. And the first thing that is straightened out, of course, was women. Women were encouraged to move out if they believe in the Mahdiya and coming to the Mahdi. Otherwise, they are to stay at home. They are not to be heard, they are not to be seen. They were even removed from the law. Women were supposed to be disciplined. There is no law except for hudud laws. But then otherwise, if a woman walked into the market, she could be driven out by the governor of the market, or flogged, or could be turned to her father to lock her up, or something like that. So it completely removed women from the public sphere. Okay. This Mahdiya was conquered. Of course, there is the Anglo-Egyptian condominium that ruled the Sudan up to 1955. During this era, everything that was there through the Mahdiya was kept to some extent. But women were allowed to go out to work as sellers or have stores in the market. And they are not to be touched. So the first thing that the administration was in the hands of the British, because Egypt itself was in the hands of the British at the time. So the dignitaries of the Sudan came and sat with the British and they said, as long as you are not going to touch your traditions, we are fine. And they made a pact with them. So throughout this time, there was very little change in the status of women. And then, of course, we were to get the British and the Egyptians out. And the Sudanese nationalism started in 1942. And it continued after independence, which happened in 1955, but 1956, the first day of the year, 1956, was supposed to be the National Day. The biggest mistake that the nationalists made, despite the fact that women also participated. There were very few educated women, but they participated in the national movement. So they said, they told women, just stay, please, calm down. We have some important issues to do here. We have some infrastructure to build, and we will tend to you later. Well, of course, women are still waiting. So all this caused the history of women, caused some changes in the lives of women. And actually it happened through wars. During the earlier times, the people who fought the wars were the decision makers. So women were the decision makers in the early Nubian kingdoms, and then it, of course, were to men to be the decision maker. And fighters must be rewarded. Therefore, they have to rule. In came the colonial era, and they did not do much because they were also afraid that if women in the Sudan or other colonies got their freedom, got their education, whatever they want to do, then the colonial women are going to be awakened to this, and they are going to want the same thing. So it is better to keep everyone down, oppressed. Through this also came an era that slavery was a thing in the Sudan. And the emancipation of those slaves transferred their roles to women. Therefore, women lost the right to own land, and the seclusion of women became the best thing to do. And women refused to allow their names to appear in any public document. It was scandalous. So if you have a brother and you inherited, you both inherited your father, mother, whatever, but it goes in the records, the official records, only in the name of the male in the family. And this later on created, created some confusion and some very interesting court cases because the sons of those women wanted what their mothers inherited because they are supposed to inherit their women. During all this, the world of women became totally feminized, and only eunuchs may be present in it. It's led to appearance of traditional practices, both beneficial and harmful, and restriction to the women movement and any participation by women. And of course, religion came to strengthen that. People use, whether they're Christians or Muslims or other, believe in other ideological ancestral thing. The world became the monopoly of men, okay, and strengthened by the religion. If your father told you, God told you to stay at home, then you have no other way but to stay at home because you want to obey God. I will come to this later if we need some entertainment of some how the feminine and the masculine mixed and changed roles and started to look alike in traditional practices. The status of Sudanese women, of course, became something that women in the 20s, I would like to jump to the 20th century because long stories are not useful here. So some jobs were branded and stigmatized by slavery. So nursing, for example, or a secretarial job. These are supposed to be service jobs. And oh, that is beneath your dignity. And this beneath your dignity continues up to this date. So people started, or actually men started to choose which jobs are suitable for women, despite the fact that when we go into this gender thing, we will put nursing and secretarial jobs as women's jobs. They were for a long time men's jobs until like the mid or the 60s, 70s of the 20th century. The other things that are not fit for women, the politics and legal jobs. Teaching is the only thing allowed. However, it has to be where you live. Where a woman lives, she teaches there, she doesn't move. And at the time, there were very few schools and very few teachers, and teachers need to be moved from one place to the other so as to cover all those schools. So that also kept education for women restricted it for some time. In the 1990s, I think it was 1992, when the governor of Khartoum forced women out of jobs at gas stations because young women started to take these jobs because they needed to educate themselves or to help their families mainly. They also said waitressing in restaurants and hotels, these are jobs that deem beneath women's dignity. So if you want women to leave a place, just tell them that you are better than this. You cannot do this because it is beneath you. The informal sector jobs such as selling food left without regulation because it is thought of course, this is an extension of her job at home. Someone has their microphone open. So, and then we come to the other thing that its root extended from all those, the pre-colonization era, colonization era. And I will give examples here. Personal status law for Muslims. There is only one law for personal status. For example, in that law, which still exists, of course, actually it's a new law. It was passed in 1991 during the previous government. A woman cannot contract her own marriage. She is always under the guardianship of a man, and she must obey her husband if he ordered her to leave her job. Of course, there are some conditions for that. If he doesn't have a job, who is going to have a job and feed the family? Non-Muslim women in the Sudan, despite their large number, were left at the mercy of their ethnic or religious groups. So the government just intervened where Muslim women are concerned. Muslim women are concerned. The civil service law was actually the least gender-based, but then it is affected by the personal status law, because if a man told his wife not to work, well, this law is not going to apply for her or to her. And women achieved in the 1980s, 70s to 80s, achieved, for example, a pension. Women used to work as teachers, but there was no equality between them and the men. The men can have pensions, but women didn't. So one of the women's movement in the Sudan is to bring some of those rights to women. There are parts of the law which is the obeying the husband. If a woman did not obey her husband, the law up until 1970 or 72, she could be forced by the police to go back. And the roots of this go to French law, which came into Egypt, which came into the Sudan. The evidence law, there are incidents where the testimony of a woman may not be accepted, such as in some of the hudud cases. The law also ignored the social practices that should be illegal and harmful to women and to society in general, such as customary marriage. And I can explain this later if there is a question about it. Okay, the International Women's Movement. Actually, the International Women's Movement is really past some formidable hurdles. Why? Because we locked horns. And during the first and second Women's International conferences, there was a huge difference between African, Asian, sometimes Latin American, and Europe and the United States. African women were concerned that the West was sending the correct message, but probably to the wrong people. They were talking to adult women only, for example, regarding female circumcision, and then using the proper terminology. The funny thing about the terminology also comes with female circumcision. There was a huge cry and hue by Western, or now we call them North and South instead of West and East, about the terminology. Forgetting, of course, that before colonization and English and French and German and everything, people in Africa talked. They have their own languages. So whether that is translated to female circumcision or female genital mutilation or whatever you think, that is not going to make any difference. You are going to talk to people in their own language using that word. Any other word could be insulting to them, could actually hamper the work. So and also the terminology like explaining gender. Do we really have to do that? Can we just give the examples of how our societies are organized without naming it gender? Because there was also very loud religious and traditional and sexist cry over the word gender and over feminism, and feminism was immediately linked to lesbianism, and you can't say you are a feminist. So even feminists at the time didn't want to call themselves feminists because, well, why just hold yourself back? Okay. Men were excluded, despite the fact that they were in control. Any educational programs they were excluded from, and sometimes included where it doesn't count. For example, when the World Bank came to talk about the vegetation and how women should fetch wood and what they should do, they started to talk to men. Men did not pay attention. And I was going to say, hey, we talked to you about, breaking these branches and not planting other trees. And they said, well, go talk to women because they are the ones fetching the wood. We got nothing to do with this. So sometimes we have to go back and revise so many things. And thank goodness we came to also find the similarities between African women or Asian women and women in the North. Okay, I'm having difficulty getting this. So what was the role of women everywhere and international organizations? All these fights during the 70s and 80s and into the 90s actually were very useful, okay, and corrected some of our, how to communicate with each other. how to understand, for example, how to understand what colonialism means, despite the fact that, for example, the United States was a colony itself until it got its independence, but that was a different type of colonialism, perhaps because it is a colonialism of some settlers. Colonialism in Africa had to be understood. So we got to that. And then the United Nations changed from being just an entity that is built there against war. We want to keep the world from going into war. Good luck with that. But we became, they became comfortable with the discussion of issues like gender streaming, feminist ideas, and generally talking to people rather than just restrict themselves to governments. If you talk through governments, governments have all types of conspiracy theories to tell women, such as contraceptives are not good for you because they cause cancer, and because these people don't want you to breed. And despite the fact that, or maybe because of the fact that the United States was still fighting in the 60s and probably the 70s for the right of women to contraceptives, Africa and Asia were using that since like the beginning of the 60s. So they said, if they are good, why are they fighting it and preventing their women from using it? That was used against the contraceptives. The UNICEF took a bold step because it supported local women's organizations. For example, a program called Salima against female circumcision that was implemented because the government did not want to contradict UNICEF. They did not want to get into a fight with an international entity. So that was successful because the United Nations was timid for a long time. She didn't get into these women's issues. So some people thought, well, Africans don't know anything. Let us get them by the hand. Of course, they faced resistance. And there was one story, I think any of you who saw the danger of the one story by Chimamanda Ngozi would relate to this, where African women cannot do something and we have to do it for them. It changed from African women, what do you want us to do so that we can work on all these women issues. Also, the Western media started to notice other people. So the humanization through motherhood, for example, it was a long time thing going in New York Times. This also brought the attention of people in the West to some dilemmas in the other countries, and women also sought the similarities between the two. The more similarities we find between each other, the more it is easier for us to move forward. Okay, I think I will stop here and allow you to ask questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Abel-Halim. Moji, you have a question.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Abel-Halim, for an enlightening presentation. As you spoke about Sudan, that reminded me too of Nigeria. And I do agree with you that the roots of social injustice, particularly for African women on the continent, are very deep. You threw in a teaser about customary marriage. And I thought maybe because we still have some time, whether you can say a bit more about customary marriages in Sudan, and how this is another example of the continued oppression of women.
Could you say that again? I didn't get all of it.
Yeah, the question has to do with customary marriage that you said if someone asked, you would want to talk more about.
Oh, okay. Actually, the word customary marriage came to us from Egypt. In Egypt, there is a law that a marriage has to be registered in a register at the court. If that marriage is not registered, the woman has no rights in that marriage. Only if there are children, then the children have the right to being the man's children, and he should take care of them also. But a woman does not have that. However, in the Sudan, we don't have that. All marriages are customary because the Sudan is a big area. The rural areas cannot just sit there and make their own register. So you can prove that. If need be, you can come to court and prove the marriage. However, we got that despite, and it became something between specifically university students. They will do these customary marriages, like get a piece of paper and write on it that we are married, and you sign it, I sign it. And of course, that is for the benefit of men because they are looking for sex. But the consequences are dire for the woman. She has no rights whatsoever. And in a place that is still conservative, these people who are moving, these students who are moving from the capital city into the rural areas, going back to smaller towns or to villages, they may be considered like damaged goods. They will lose. So in that they also lose. Okay. This is the custom religion that it is, and if the woman wanted to prove that she was married to this man, but the piece of paper signed by her and him, there were no witnesses. Usually a proper marriage is witnessed by at least 2 people. Without witnesses, she is out in the cold. Okay, that's.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Jean first, and then Sharon.
Hi, Asma. Thanks for such a great talk. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the role of dowry in the Sudan today. Is that still a key factor?
Well, it depends now. Sometimes people would do like group marriages, where all the money that was supposed to be dowry would go to the couple so as to start their home. In other places now, like in the big cities, and with the money coming from expatriates in the oil-rich places, it is really a huge burden. They spend thousands and millions for one night of a wedding, which also keep people who are not expatriates from being able to marry. So sometimes there will be, like a consensus between the people in a certain area that the dowry should be, for example, restricted to 10 pounds. The rest of the money goes to the couple. And that maybe the parents were also poor. Then the community would make a wedding party. But in the cities, it is a huge burden. It's still a huge burden on men to come with the proper amount of money.
My turn?
Mm-hmm.
Asma, I would echo everyone else. Thank you. And part of the time I was listening on the telephone, so I missed the very beginning as I was running to a computer that would work. But I was wondering if you would talk about the nationalist movement. I was particularly struck by your comments about the matrilineal cultures in the Nubian region, and I think you said also in Darfur. I'm not sure. I was on the phone then. But when the nationalist movements occurred to claim independence, was there any recognition of women's previous roles, important roles in the culture that predated the colonial influence and the other oppressive invasion forces? Like, did anyone make a claim for the indigenous role of women then?
Well, sorry to tell you, no. Because the independence wasn't anymore, and I think Moji could support me in that. They weren't anything more than post-colonial states. And the post-colonial states continued what was going on during the colonial period. The only thing that remains from that matriarchal and matrilineal society, for example, in the Nubian areas, Huda could also support me on this. Men would still call each other, not officially though, but informally they will call each other by their mother's name. So Muhammad would be called Muhammad Fatma or Muhammad Huda. That is the only thing that remained. But the history remains an archaeological thing, not something to be brought back.
So one of the things that we're studying in my 3010 class right now included Lakota men decrying violence against women because it's not traditional to Lakota culture. And I'm wondering, is there any indigenous movement today, or even in the feminist movement today, that asks men to think about women's historical role and power in the culture?
Well, actually, the movement, or I think it is not a movement, it has been there for a while. The traditional thing is that you are not a man if you beat up a woman. Okay. Not only that, for example, the extended family provided refuge for women. If a father was beating up his daughter, she could just leave and go to her uncle's house, and her uncle would keep her there until her father stopped doing what he was doing. Okay? And there is also something that remains about the spiritual power of women. The spiritual power of women makes them, they give them some respect. For example, I think at the Humanities Institute a few years ago, I was talking about the relationship of the man with his mother-in-law. His mother-in-law is the most cherished person in the family. A man could never, ever insult or touch his mother-in-law. That also one of the sociologists that remained from the matrilineal thing, this respect, because women were in a high place, and this is what remained. And if a man want to challenge another man, he would say, Nasibtak, do this. Nasibtak is your mother-in-law. So if someone puts your mother-in-law as a challenge, you have to take that challenge. Okay. And violence against women exists, yes, in some areas it exists. But then there are, the elders there in the rural areas, they take care of this. So sometimes when we talk about violence against women, people could almost deny it as if it doesn't happen, but it happens. Even in, the upper class, and the upper class turned out to be a place for violence against women, because women just want to stay in that rich place, okay? But in other places, it is customarily being taken care of by so this is why when we wanted to talk about, for example, face scars or female circumcision as violence, people don't understand that, because we consider them something beneficial to the women. You can't talk about, and this is one of the things that we locked horn with other feminists, is that we have to start with people from where they are. We don't want to go ahead of people and then say, come along, follow us. They won't. We have to start where they are. And then we can get to places of like having laws against the practice of having, just changing the social formation of these things.
If I can follow up with one more just kind of thought or comment, I'm wondering if, so the background is I'm reading about matriarchal cultures, and many of them are gender segregated. There are very specific roles for women and very specific roles for men, but the roles are equally valuable. And it reminds me of the concept of gender complementarity, which isn't always equal. So I wonder if you would share your thoughts about that idea about gender complementarity.
Well, gender complementarity is actually happening. For example, when I told you that I'm going to entertain you, I wanted to show you practices done by women considered sacrilegious, while similar practices pertaining to religion done by men is also considered a good thing, despite the fact that there are some Muslims who also consider it sacrilegious and should not be done. And these are the collective practices. Women would ground is called zar in the Sudan and Egypt, or bore in other places in Africa, which is women would appease the spirits. If she has a British spirit, then she will wear British clothes and the drums will be done. And women during that would do everything that they are not allowed to do. They will drink wine, they will smoke cigarettes, they would do things that are considered not for good women to do. However, during Zar, people turn a blind eye to it. When you come to, for example, Zikr, you find some of the dances are actually taken out of women dances. And men are allowed to do that dance. No one sees. So here, the feminine and the masculine overlap. Also, in other places, for example, in agricultural areas, women wear whatever they want to wear because they work the fields. And they work the fields with the men. Then the gender divide comes when that place becomes mechanized. Men take the tractors and women are still picking the weeds by hand. But the role is the same. They are participating in the agriculture. Even construction. Women would participate in construction not for money, but to help their husbands. They may collect the bricks, they may bring water, they may do things that are supposed to be done by men but are left for women to do. And then no one talks about a woman's role here, or a woman sitting among men for that. And they complement each other and overlap sometimes. So if you want to see, let me see if I can do this.
What you're telling me is it's much more complicated than my initial question.
Maybe I didn't get your question.
No. What I'm learning is that the idea of complementarity is not a simple one, which I appreciate.
Okay, any other questions?
If I may, a couple comments and a question, actually. First of all, I was excited to hear you mention Cynthia Enloe at the beginning. I learned from her back when I was at Clark University. It's great to see how she influences so many people and inspires so many people. So that was really neat. Also, it was interesting what you talked about with the nationalist movement and how women were put on the back burner, because that's something I see wherever I go. So for example, Francis Hasso talks about in the Palestinian movement, women's rights were put on the back burner. They were told, well, wait, we have to achieve liberation first, and then we'll address your issues. Similarly, Gioconda Belli in Nicaragua talks about this same situation where they're saying, okay, let the Sandinista movement come to culmination first. Once we take over, then we'll deal with women's issues. And so women are all constantly being told, we need your support, but wait before we address your interests. And so that's something I see in a lot of different countries. I thought it was interesting to see it play out again, but also very frustrating. Also, when you mentioned conspiracy theories about contraception, I've also seen that, and you see how men use that to their advantage. But I also feel like Western countries create this situation that are conducive to those conspiracy theories. So for example, when I was in Bangladesh, they were giving radios to men who got vasectomies. But everybody knows in Bangladesh that they're not doing that in the US, right? It's only for Bangladeshis. And it creates a situation where people feel like they're just trying to limit us. They're trying to control us. They don't do this to themselves. They don't offer American men radios to have a vasectomy. It's only for us. And so I think that feeds into the conspiracy theories, the sense of hypocrisy and the sense that they're being controlled by some neo-colonial power. But my question was related to one of your first slides. You showed the diversity of Sudan. And I was wondering, how does that affect the women's movement? Does that make it harder for women to unify, or does it play to an advantage for women in the women's movement in Sudan?
Well, thank you for your comments and your question. Actually, it turned out to be beneficial to women in the Sudan. When the war was going on in southern Sudan, now South Sudan, southern women in the north worked closely with northern women. The horrible, racial thing was happening with women and men who were in the south, who were told never ever befriend anyone in the north. However, the people who lived in the north knew exactly what the women specifically, what they were doing. And there was a good connection between them. And it doesn't matter now who is talking to women. You could be from a totally different group, but you can talk to the other groups. And also, for example, the Women's Union, which is now back, but has been out for a long time, they provided a platform for all women. In that, women met with each other, knew each other, and you will find that the racism tone that is happening now in the Sudan is led mainly by men. Women voices are very peaceful and are very knowledgeable of the consequences of war.
That's good, thank you. That makes sense. Does anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay then. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Abel-Halim. I greatly appreciate this. This is a great ending to our series. And thank you everyone for attending as well. And great conversation, great questions people asked too. So I'm much appreciative of that.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Thanks everyone. We'll be in touch. Goodbye.